All right, so we are here tonight with Jose Vega. Jose is a 25-year-old young man who's running for Congress in New York's 15th Congressional District. Jose, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm hanging in there, trying to get on the ballot.
Yeah, so I guess that's actually a pretty good jumping off point there. What do you have to do to get ballot access?
So, because I'm running as an independent, I'm required. I have to get about twice the signature requirements that Democrats and Republicans need. So I need 3,500 signatures in my district, as opposed to the Democrats and Republicans who only need about 1,200 or so. And I only have a 6 week window to actually collect all of those signatures. So, and that 6 week window starts in about 2 weeks from now, which starts on April 16th. So, yeah.
I see. So you're coming right up on it. Is this involved a lot of like door to door sort of campaigning, trying to get people's attention with this stuff, or have you predominantly tried to like spread the message online?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, I can only start collecting signatures on April 16th. Like, that's the window. And, I've been letting people know, like, hey, when I come back knocking on April 16th, can you please sign my petition? But yeah, I mean, also what I've been doing on the online is getting people who want to, is getting my message out there like, hey, if you're a New York State voter, please, I need your help. I need you to help me get the signatures I need. Help me get on the ballot. Because if I don't get these signatures, well, then people aren't going to see me on the ballot. So, yeah, just to put it lightly.
Yeah, I think that that's really important, and I kind of wanted to ask also. I really don't know, but are you aware of like your own congressional district, if there's any kind of history of like an independent getting ballot access, or even sort of making a run for it?
Well, there's Diane Sayre, who's not exactly in my district. She ran New York State. She ran against Chuck Schumer 2 years ago, and now she's running against Kirsten Gillibrand, and her requirements are 10,000 times more difficult than mine because what she needs the minimum of 45,000 signatures, and because you can be challenged, you actually need closer to like 90,000 signatures or so. And because she's running as an independent, as opposed to the Democrat and Republican who only need about 15,000 signatures. So yeah, and she was the only independent to do it in New York State. Um, so, uh, you know, yeah, and we, like, the Libertarians couldn't do it, the Green Party couldn't do it. So, you know, we were the only ones. And I mean, in my district, no, nobody else has ever done it. Not that I know of, at least.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, I mean, it's a pretty, not to, count our chickens before they hatch sort of thing, but if you even got ballot access, that's a huge deal. It's like kind of a historic thing, I would argue.
Yeah, you could look at it that way, but I am going to I'm going. I mean, yes, it would be historic to be on the ballot as an independent in that district. It would be like the first time it's happening. But I'm going beyond that, man. I mean, I don't want to promise people a vote or even a win. I mean, let's be realistic here. But I am promising people a movement. And it starts with the petitioning and the ballot access. I mean, yeah, that's just kind of the start of getting on the ballot. And then it's like, well, you look at the environment and you look at the country right now. Everyone's pissed off at Biden, and everyone's pissed off at the Democrats and Republicans. Everyone's pissed off at the government, period. And look at the fact that people have been voting uncommitted, the fact that people have been voting of the blank ballots, which I think here in New York State, 15% of people who voted in the primaries ended up voting blank. That's the last figure I saw. It was 15% of total votes were all blank, which, like, if that's verified and if that's true, that's a pretty big deal. So, I mean, what kind of potential is there for an independent candidate now in the most controlled district? Because it's the poorest congressional district in the entire country, right? The South Bronx. That's what this district is. And it's also kind of a tale of two cities because you have Riverdale, which is like the upper echelon. Like, people who live in Riverdale don't even say they live in the Bronx. They say, no, I live in Riverdale. And then there's people who are like in the South Bronx who probably have never left the South Bronx. So you and who are living like day to day, paycheck to paycheck, are probably on some kind of welfare, if not on every possible welfare option you can be on. So I mean, this kind of tale of two cities is yeah, it's that's my district. And I'm looking at the circumstances. I'm looking at the situation. I look at Richie Torres. For people who don't know, Richie Torres is the congressman for South Bronx for New York 15. That's the district I'm running in. He is like the most controlled IPAC. Basically, Richie Torres is living proof that you can just buy a congressional district with enough money. And it's not about Richie Torres. Like, Richie Torres as an individual is not the problem. He is part of the problem, but he's not the problem. IPAC is the one that, or APAC is the one that finances him, right? They poured $1.2 million into his campaign, right, to be the stalwart of this district. Like, why, why should that be allowed at all, right? And all he does is just like milk his support for Israel while his constituents are just getting poorer every day. That's the problem. And so I'm coming in here not as a Democrat or Republican. I'm saying we need to get rid of the two-party system. We need to actually move beyond it. Can we move beyond it? Can my campaign be an experiment in that? Is the Bronx, really the country, ready to move beyond the two-party system and actually elect independent-minded um, independent-minded candidates?
Yeah, man. I mean, a lot of the stuff you've just said there, I think, is so crucial and so important, especially the idea that, many Americans feel like we live in a one party system, despite the fact that it appears as though on the surface it's a two-party system. It looks as though no matter who you vote for imperialism, you vote for endless wars, you vote for, benefits for people, like welfare, be it welfare or different, social services that are provided for people. You vote for those things to be taken away or reduced. You vote for higher prices, rising inflation, lower standard of living for everybody. I mean, most people feel like this sense that it doesn't matter who you vote for, you end up with essentially the same results. But what's interesting to me, and I wanted to get your take on this, there still is that inclination among some people to feel like, well, this party, in this case, let's say it's the Democrats, because you would be, you're challenging an incumbent who is a Democrat, and your district has been predominantly, run by Democrats. You're going to be going up against a Democrat, and many supporters of the Democratic Party, they're not enthusiastic. They vote simply because, well, I don't like Trump, or I don't like the alternative. Or in New York, I know this past, like a midterm season, a lot of people were saying, well, I'm very concerned about women's right to an abortion and that not being threatened. And so I want to vote for the Democrat, not because I like them, but because I don't want abortion rights taken away. What is your view on that? Like, how can we break that tendency among people to just reflexively go with the lesser of two evils?
Um, People need to stop being dumb. Right? Like, there's only so much that I can do, right? At some point, people have to make the decision, like, okay, you know what? I'm tired of choosing between a shotgun to the head or, drinking my poison pill. Like, and I hate saying this, but the more I, live, the more I learn it's true. People do get the government they deserve. And yes, people are lied to. Yes, there are evil people. Yes, George H. Bush, George W. Bush. I mean, Biden, Obama, Trump, like all of these options have been completely terrible. Why do we settle? Why do we settle? And yeah, you can say, well, the media manipulates us, this and that, but all of us as American citizens have an inherent responsibility to take responsibility for our government. Like we can say, yeah, Biden sucks, and Biden does suck. He's terrible. And people want to say, well, I didn't vote for him. It doesn't matter. It's still your country. This is a reflection of you, whether you like it or not. You can't divorce yourself from that. There's only so much I can do to, provoke people to think about it. What it's going to require is it's a revolution that's going to be required. It's going to take people saying, I'm fed up with the system, because it's not going to be fixed through voting. It's just not. I mean, sure, let's say I win. Let's say I get in. I'm only one congressman out of 435. But even if you had 435 congressmen that were independent, how do you know that they'll actually be good? I mean, maybe they aren't going to be bought and paid for by APAC and other special interest groups, fine. But like, what actually qualifies somebody to represent you and represent your government? Just because they're not the evil guy? Like, that's still not enough, in my opinion, to qualify somebody as a candidate. Like, the standards for what we have as candidates has dropped so far. And it's because people have let it fall so far down. I'm 25 years old. I mean, who the hell voted for Bush twice? Okay, those people are still voting. Like, it's So I hope I'm being clear on what I'm trying to say.
No, I think that that's very clear. I think, and it reflects reality, right? Like at the end of the day, we have to sort of look to ourselves and understand that, the system is incredibly flawed. There's lots of problems with it, but they do give us the option in some sense to control our own destiny. Like we can have people like you try to run as an independent and lead a grassroots kind of movement to get into Congress. And you're right, even if you won, you're only one person, but there's no reason also to assume that if it's possible here, it's possible to do that all over the country. It's just a matter of getting people motivated. And I think that's what's good about a lot of your activism. And I kind of want to talk about that. So, I kind of know you from speaking out during these various, public appearances of different people and sort of calling them out on their crimes or their complicity in crimes or their lying or their corruption. My favorite one probably was when you called out Nancy Pelosi, called her a war criminal. But I recently just actually on stream, I watched you confronting, I think it was like the editorial staff of the New York Times, talking about all of the times the Times has lied. Can you speak about that? Like, what got you into the activism and, calling out these various corrupt individuals?
Yeah, I would I would call it probably guerrilla warfare at this point. I mean, beyond activism, because that's what it feels like sometimes. You have to disrupt these events. You have to go into the belly of the beast. I mean, it's one thing to protest, it's one thing to hand out literature, but it's like confronting the people who are telling the lies to their face. There's clearly a thirst for it and a hunger for it because of the reaction that it got. I mean, these videos that you've seen, like the one with the New York Times, that one was translated into many different languages. And then it was viewed, I think, like, I don't know, 9 million times or so, 90 million times, excuse me. Like, it's been viewed a lot. Um, it's been getting a lot of play, and it still gets reposted and goes viral often, even without me wanting it to. Like, it just happens. And why? Is that because it's just a dramatic video? I mean, it is a dramatic video, but people see the context, people see what I'm saying, and they resonate with it. There's a hunger and a thirst for truth. Like, that's why I do it, because if nobody else is going to tell the truth, well, then somebody should tell the truth. And then I get criticisms of it all the time. They're like, well, you didn't do it right, or you should have done it this way instead of that way. And my response to that is always like, okay, well, just do it. Like, if you're not happy with the way I do something, okay, fine. Like, go do it yourself. That's been my whole point this entire time. Um, has It's always been like, well, okay, other people need to do this. It shouldn't just be me. If it's just me, it won't have the effect that's required in order to actually overturn the axiom, so that these institutions who think they still control everything actually don't control everything. But it's going to require other people to stand up. And that's what I've been trying to provoke people to do. And that's what I call it, a provocation, is like, okay, you saw what I did. You're inspired by what I did. Now you need to go do the same thing too. And I will say, like, other people have been doing it, whether that's because of me or not. Like, the Palestine and Gaza question has actually opened a lot of people's minds and has allowed them to, go out and interrupt these events. Like, now they're doing it without me, without they're just interrupting these events. Like, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, like, these people can't step outside of their own home without being interrupted. Like, it's hilarious to me, but it's happening. And um yeah, so what I'm trying to do with that is just to get other people to do it. I've always had that belief. This is not a vanity thing. It's not a wow, Jose's great kind of thing. It's a no, like, this is just what every American citizen should be doing. And every time I go tell somebody else to do it, like, only very few people actually go and do it, because then they're like, no way, I don't have the guts. It's like, actually, you do, because I didn't think I had the guts either. I sometimes I still don't. Sometimes I'm like petrified to do these things, but you still got to do them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it might sound like hyperbole, but I mean it sincerely. I think it does require a great deal of bravery to do what you're doing. I mean, you say things that I think a lot of people are, they're just not things that you hear shouted in public like that in a forum like that. Calling someone like Nancy Pelosi a war criminal, I don't think a lot of people really make that connection with her, but it's broadly true when you look at her actions in Congress over the years and her complicity in a lot of the military action that's taken place, that America has perpetrated on the rest of the world. And even, you mentioned to her, thankfully, her landing in Taiwan. Like, talk about provocation. That's actual provocation. That's like, potentially provoking a war with a nuclear power in China. My question for you would be, what would you say was your favorite call out? Do you have one? Like, was there a person or group or event where you really felt like, man, like, this felt good, it felt right, it felt like, I really made a difference?
Um, uh, a group or a call out that I felt like made a difference.
Or like
Mm,
one that you just enjoyed a lot?
oh, well, the one that I enjoyed a lot was just where I called Nancy Pelosi a sad old drunk. See, there is a difference in how I go about these things, and I know some big social media commentators like one method over the other. Like uh, 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 I remember, who was it? It was Katie Halpert, actually, and like, this is how I actually got to know Katie Halpert. She had commented on the AOC intervention I did initially. You remember that one? Like, the one I did well, I guess for your viewers who may not know, in October of 22, I confronted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I called her a coward to her face, saying that she was financing neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And as a result of that, um, what happened was, uh, uh, oof, man, that's like what blew me up on my profile. But the way I confronted her was from a place of like anger and calling out the hypocrisy to her face and saying, like, you did this, I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. Like that's what I had told her, and that's what resonated strongly with the people like Glenn Greenwald and others who would then go on to retweet the intervention. And Katie Halpert had said, uh, uh, sorry, hold on. Katie Halpert put it put out something, a tweet where she said, I don't actually agree with the way in which the boys, because it wasn't just me, it was me and Kynan, my friend Kynan, who confronted AOC. I don't agree with the way that they actually did this. I think there's an art to protesting. And so she started getting a lot of hate because like they were like, oh, how could you denounce this? And I responded just by telling people like, hey, I love Katie Halpert and I think people should watch her documentary that got her fired from the Hill. And so then she brought me on her show and then we discussed it more, right? Um, like so I bring that up because some people think that with the interventions it's like a showboaty kind of like dramatic, but no, like I'm trying to get to the thing that keeps the person awake at night. Like, and I get a lot of hate for saying this, but I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not as bad as people want to make her out to be. I think somewhere in there is the capability for her to do good. And I just want to put out a disclaimer. I think what she's doing right now is really bad with endorsing Joe Biden. She's denouncing and getting on the congressional record that there's a genocide happening in Gaza, which is good. But then she goes and endorses Joe Biden because he's the lesser of two evils against Trump. I mean, that's not somebody who's seriously trying to change things in the country. But I think given a better environment, maybe she could be provoked to do so. Irregardless, with Nancy Pelosi, though, I wasn't trying to like eat at her conscience. This woman is old and dried up, and so what I did with her was I'm just going to ridicule her from the so-called authority she thinks she has. You have to be iconoclastic. You have to really ruin the image that these people think they have just by tap dancing on them, right? So, Nancy Pelosi is somebody I just called her a saddle drunk and I cracked jokes at her because, well, she deserves that. As opposed to somebody like AOC, I'm going to try and mess with their conscience that I know eats at them. As I say, I often quote this. There's a quote by Edgar Poe from his short story William Wilson. What say of it? What say of conscious grim, that specter in my path? It's like there's a ghost that exists in all of the back of our minds that's saying we're not doing enough or we're not doing what we should be doing. And she has that voice because she's had to make many moral concessions to be in the Congress, to keep her position and to not be primaried out. Like she knows she's betrayed the principles that she initially ran on. She became under control. So when I confronted her, I was, going after that voice. I was like, listen to that voice in the back of your head. And that's why, that's how I determine how to do an intervention. And that's what I call these little things. I do interventions. It's like, who am I talking to and who's going to hear it? Like that's the key to it. So I do remember after I confronted AOC, there were a few other interventions that happened. There was one done on Ilhan Omar. There was one done on Rashida Tlaib and others. And then, as a result of these like interventions, they put out this document basically asking Joe Biden, "Oh, you can keep sending weapons and money to Ukraine. Just like, can you put some diplomacy in there?" And then the letter was retracted within 24 hours. And I remember Max Blumenthal putting out on Twitter, like, this wouldn't have happened if people like Jose Vega weren't, yelling at these people. And then they retracted the letter. And I was like, oh my God, these cowards. They couldn't even go 24 hours without getting slaps on the wrist against this, you know. So, I mean, I think that one, the one I just said, where they put out this letter because of the interventions we were doing, um, was probably the most the what do you want to say? Like the most the effect that had, like, you could see the effect directly, but I think a lot of these interventions have an unseen effect. It does move things in the background that I just will never really know. I believe that there's an unseen effect on all of these interventions that I do that changes things in ways that I'll never know. I know it's brought around great people around me who work with me every day now because they saw what I did. They then did it themselves, like Robert. Castle, who confronted Hillary Clinton. Like, he's a great friend of mine now. And he did an intervention on Hillary Clinton, and like now him and I work, together every day, right? And that's a kind of unseen effect that I didn't see until he came here, because he saw my interventions, and because he saw my interventions, he was inspired to do one, and now we're super cool and close.
Yeah, man. I'm thinking as you're saying all of this. I mean, it's really maybe the coolest thing about talking with you is the fact that you're still, you're a very young guy. You're only 25, and I happen to think young people typically have most of the political questions, the important political questions on their minds pretty frequently. They're thinking about this stuff to some extent. I mean, the politically active ones, anyway, right? And this is, for a college radio station, right? Um, I do think that while many of these young people are mulling over some of these big political questions, and some of them have very strong opinions, that what they're missing is that actual initiative or drive to go out and do things as you're describing. I mean, you don't even see protests, I think, as frequently as you used to, or at least not in the same numbers as you used to. Like, I think initially with the war in Gaza, you saw lots of stuff in New York City anyway. But I mean, like, I was at Humanity for Peace this past summer, and it was a cool event and everything like that. But I couldn't help but think, like, man, this would be great if you just had, maybe like 100 more young people who were like really enthusiastic and really like, I don't know, like impassionate or passionate about it.
Wait, you're at the August 6th rally?
Yes, at
Oh,
Dag
nice.
Hammarskjöld Plaza.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was a great event. But yeah, I guess my question would be, like, does your campaign place any emphasis on trying to get the attention of like younger voters, many of whom are disaffected from both parties?
Um, the answer is yeah, absolutely. There's some things I just cannot tell you about because I don't know how. Um, like, okay, I'll say this: we are distributing stickers to our volunteers for them to put on their laptops and any personal belongings in any public place where they be allowed to post any kind of stickers that they would like. And I think people should exercise um, their freedom of speech, and they should be allowed to put their imagery up wherever legally permissible. I think that's you know, as okay. What we've started is an operation called Guerrilla Warfare for Truth in the Bronx. The idea is we want to put up about 10,000 stickers everywhere in the Bronx that have my image on it. It's this image that says "The truth defies silence. Vote Jose Vega," and it's uh, uh, an image of me being carried out of Temple Emmanuel. Let me see if I can actually send this to you here while we're talking. I'll find it here. But the idea is we want to get about 10,000 of those up or so. Actually, we need 70,000. Like, if we actually, you remember like the obey sign, the obey stickers. Like it says
Yes.
like it's right. Like, okay, here's a quick one I can send you. It's not an actual image of like the sticker itself, but it's it'll give you a sense of like what the image is. And just for your viewers who are listening to audio only, it's me on the very lower third of an image, and I'm basically on the floor and I'm pointing up because security guards have dragged me on the ground, and I'm speaking, and everyone else is in like grayed out except for me. I'm the only one in color. And then there's rays coming down and it says "The truth defies silence, vote Jose Vega." So that's my sticker image. And you'll notice it's not a typical leaflet or a flyer or a card for a candidate, right? Like, candidates have, oh, their headshot, a nice headshot, uh, and then in big letters, vote X person. And the emphasis on the image is like most of the image is not me. It's taken up by the crowd that isn't saying anything or doing anything. They're just looking. They're all quiet. They're all silent. And I'm the only one speaking out against a genocide. going on, right? And like what we want to do is we want to provoke people in the Bronx to tell the truth. Now you ask me like, how is this getting young people? Because young people are the only ones who care enough to know, because everyone knows that first of all, our country is just like completely messed up. Everyone knows our country's in bad shape. Young people are the only ones who are willing to actually do something about it that needs to be done, right? They're willing to commit guerrilla warfare for truth, non-violent guerrilla warfare, mind you, right? I really need to emphasize this. Like it's all through non-violent direct action, and it's just love at the end of the day, right? Like that's what we're doing. Like this not any different than what this student group in the 1940s was doing in Germany during at the height of like Hitler's reign. It was this group called White Rose. They were printing out leaflets that were denouncing Hitler and telling the truth, like stuff that said like, when Hitler talks of peace, he really talks of war, and they were exposing the truth. And what they were doing is they were printing these leaflets and they were putting them in phone books. They were putting them in libraries. They were putting them in all the propaganda that was being given by Hitler. And all of these kids, all of these students would be executed, right? But they fought hard to get their leaflets out there and putting them in phone books. They were putting it in like all kinds of places, as a way to tell the truth about what Hitler was doing in Germany. We are in those circumstances right now. I don't think people really get how bad things are. Like things are bleak. Okay, you're living in a total fascist totalitarian state. Everything is spied on. Everything is monitored. People think you have freedom of speech because you can say whatever vulgar insanity you want, but like no, if you actually say something that's like we see this happening where people get censored on social media all the time for saying something that the overlords don't agree with. People get, surveilled and visited by the FBI. Like you don't live in a free state. You are living in like the next Nazi Germany. You are in Nazi Germany. This is what this is. Okay, it's time for people to like actually take a stand right now. And so that's why young people are the only ones who are like, yeah, I'm not even going to question it. I'm not even going to fight you. It's like, yeah, what do we need to do about it? That's the kind of people I naturally attract around my campaign. Whereas, like, I'm at the table and then some boomer or some like 40, 50-year olds will come up and be like, yeah, but you can't actually change things, right? Or yeah, I mean, things are bad, but like, you should go focus on yourself and go start a farm. It's like, no, I love people. I love humanity. I love my country despite what it's become. I want to fix it. I'm not going to be like you who's just throwing in the towel. Like, cut me a break. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good segue into I wanted to talk about some of your positions, right? Which, I think you've alluded to a lot of them this whole conversation, but maybe we can get a little more granular, or even, very specific. But when it comes to like your community, the actual district that you wish to represent, what do you think are like some of the biggest issues there that are not being addressed by Richie Torres or really anyone who represents that community on a larger scale either?
Every day I walk around the Bronx and I see food pantry lines wrapped around the block, and it's mostly elderly people and disabled people, right? Who or immigrants or poor people who rely on these food pantries every day. It's the fact that people's ceilings are collapsing in and nobody has adequate housing. Like to have housing in the Bronx, it's like, yeah, maybe you have some shelter from the rain, and that's about as good as your apartment's going to get you because heating almost never freaking works. And, there's rats everywhere and roaches everywhere. People, sometimes your water comes out brown. Like, living in the Bronx is a health hazard, okay? Like there are some people who honestly would rather live in the street than living most housing in the Bronx. And it's what leads to fires because there's no heating. People rely on like these cheap the what do they call them? The heater, the things that generate heat that you just plug in the wall and
Space
then they
heater.
over a space heater, yeah. Right. So people rely on these space heaters and then they get cheap ones that overload and explode or something and it causes a fire. like as happened 2 years ago. I mean, things are bad, okay, in the Bronx with housing, with welfare, with the fact that people are living paycheck to paycheck. None of this is adequately being addressed. And the thing is that it's all coupled. Like, you can't look at these issues as one thing or another. It's like, okay, first we're going to fix housing, and then we're going to fix the fact that people are poor, and then we're going to fix the roaches. No, it's like it's all stemming from one major thing, which is just that the government and the country is just rot. It's just rot to the core. It's not just the Bronx. It's the entire country. It's just more visible in some places than others, right? Because the policy, ever since we put a bullet between our president's brain back in 1963, has been, yeah, we're just going to depopulate the United States by implementing policies that promote degrowth and promote promote people starving to death. And if the rich can get then make it by, then fine. Like, but we're just like, none of the policies that the United States has adopted promote any kind of population growth, only degrowth. Like, you've had an increase in rat populations in New York City, but you've had a stagnant population in New York City over the last 30 years. Like, that's horrible. Right, that the only reason the New York City population is going up right now is because of the influx of immigrants, right? And that's another thing we can talk about too. The immigrants are not the problem. New York City was falling apart way before the immigrants came in, and the immigrants only added on to the fact that New York City was just could not handle the infrastructure for his own people, let alone the immigrants coming in. And the immigrants are living in this like squalor, and it's they're living in squalor. They're not living it up and like, whoa, 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 they're in five-star hotels. Yeah, they're not getting the room service, right? There's like 8 people living in like a two-bed hotel room. Like, these people are suffering worse than New York City citizens. But you asked me specifically about my district, and like the point before I went off on a tangent was that the problem is this degrowth policy that's been instituted in the United States that Richie Torres uphold. In 1971, there was a city planner for New York City named Roger Starr, and he had this plan called planned shrinkage. He said, there's poor areas like the Bronx, Brownsville, Brooklyn, East New York, parts of Queens, and Harlem. Hey, well, wouldn't it be funny if we just cut 2/3 of the fire stations and 2/3 of the police force, and we just didn't improve those areas, like we didn't build their infrastructure, and let's put a massive highway in the Bronx too, getting rid of even more housing. Like, wouldn't that be so funny? Like, I wonder what's going to happen. Like, this is what Roger Starr, like, this was his plan. It's not. I'm not making. This isn't conspiracy theory. This was just openly promoted in the 1970s as like, yeah, planned shrinkage. We have to get rid of all the minorities and brown people from New York City because they're already burning themselves and they're shooting themselves. So let's just accelerate that process. This is like a real. This is a real thing, and that policy is still carried forward to this day. What you need is a development policy. You have an uneducated youth right now. There are people who are graduating New York City high schools. 50% of them cannot pass the English regions, and only 35% of them can actually pass the math regions, right? And they're graduating them anyway. They're graduating them anyway, right? So they're illiterate. They're graduating illiterate. And then you have an old population of people who actually know something about how to build something, and then they're dying off. So my policy proposal to fix this is what I call the Space CCC, the Space Civilian Construction Corps. It alludes to a program that FDR had back in the 1930s. Um, Called the Civilian Conservation Corps. And like what these CCC boys, that's what they nicknamed all the boys who went to the program, anyone 18 to 27, was, they were building basic infrastructure projects. They were planting tons of trees. Most of our national parks today exist because of what the CCC did. And then a lot of them went on to fight in World War II or build a lot of the infrastructure and factories that would then be used to send over military arsenal over to Germany to help our boys fight against the Nazis. Now, what I'm talking about today, what that program did was not only teach them skills like how to work with their hands, and these were unemployed, unskilled, uneducated boys. Right now, my program would be boys and men and women. I mean, I don't care, and we would include nursing in it. But they were also educating them. Like, they were like, listen, like they can't be on the job and not be literate. So they had to educate them too in how to read and how to understand what they're reading, at the same time giving them practical skills. So now my modern day space CCC program, my modern day policy is, okay, you bring that program back, you take people out of the neighborhood that's killing them and you put them in a camp, okay, away from their neighborhood, because their neighborhoods are terrible and rotten. They're surrounded by all kinds of bad influences, and you treat it like a boarding school program where they can come home for holidays and stuff. But in those 2 years, they get on the job site training. They get training for like welding, carpentry, construction work, and then you also train them in advanced aeronautic engineering, so that any one of those kids, when they graduate the 2 year program, they have the ability to work at a place like NASA, like to that level of creative power and potential, that they could build components that will be used in space, is the level at which people need to be educated who are going through this program. And so during the day, they get on the job site training, they get training in welding, carpentry, whatever practical skills you want. Then they get advanced training, and then they also become literate. You teach them literacy, you teach them how to read, you teach them classical poetry so they understand what it means to be a human being. And you have them work with our retired union laborers, people who actually know how to do these things. So you're saving two generations at once. You have the generation of young kids right now who are probably unemployed, probably drug dealing or something, or doing something illegal or something unproductive as a way to get by, selling their body on OnlyFans, doing whatever God knows what, as a way to try and make it in this terrible economy. And you say, no, I'm going to give you a meaning. I'm going to give your life some meaning. Because when they graduate this program, you say, okay, we paid you, we trained you for 2 years. Now, for 2 years, you're going to go back to your neighborhood. You're going to go build the hospital that we shut down years ago. You're going to build the school that you shut down years ago. You know that subway station that you keep complaining about that isn't being fixed? You're going to go fix that. Not only that, you're going to build new subway lines. You're going to build a cross Bronx train, which goes through my district, that's going to go from the east side of the Bronx all the way to Washington Heights, underneath the George Washington Bridge, down from Teaneck all the way down to Hoboken and loop around, right? Because that's also part of my policy proposal, that we build new subway lines. Then you're going to build a subway line that connects the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn so that people don't have to go down to Manhattan. And you're going to build it. And that's going to be the meaning and the contribution you've done to your country. And after 2 years is up, you can either go back into the world, now that you have these skills, now that you're educated, you can go and market yourself, or you can keep working for us and we'll export you to other states that need these kind of infrastructure projects that you can lead. Or you can go and teach other kids and start these other programs and be a director for these programs if you're a client to do that. I mean, like, it's the most obvious thing to me in the world. It's like, just get these people training, teach them, educate them, and have them fix the things, fix the problems that exist in our country right now. Because it's not a matter of money, it's just a matter of orientation. We spend $1 trillion on our defense budget. What did we spend $1 trillion on a program educating every high school dropout, every college dropout, every nonviolent felon, okay, and saying, we're going to give you a second chance at life. We're going to actually train you to do something productive, and you're going to go build it, and you're going to build a country you can be proud of. That's my policy.
Yeah, and that hits a bunch of things. I mean, I was gonna, expand out from your community to just broader domestic stuff. And I think, in your explanation there, you sort of hit on, your vision of America domestically, right? And you kind of even went into a little bit of my next topic, which was going into all of these imperialist interventions America is engaging in. At this point indirectly, but it looks like there's the potential that we end up getting sucked in directly to some of these conflicts. I did want to ask you, your thoughts on a few of these different conflicts. Namely like the Russia-Ukraine war and then the war in Gaza. Just give me your take as, potentially a future congressman. What would your position be in terms of us supporting Ukraine with more and more weapons, and for that matter, supporting Israel, in its war on the innocent people of Gaza. What's your stance on that? How do you feel about both conflicts in general?
Well, see, I mean, this goes back to what I was talking about orientation, because like our country's orientation right now is that we need war, right? We need war, we want war, and we need a reason to keep Raytheon and Lockheed Martin employees employed so that they can keep generating missiles. But I think it's a little more sinister than that. You talked to me about Ukraine. Ukraine started in 2014. No matter what anybody tells you, it started in 2014 with the Maidan coup. This was engineered by Victoria Nuland herself and the US and NATO, backing the opposition forces to Yanukovych at the time, because Yanukovych was going to make a deal. The president of Ukraine at the time was going to make a deal with Putin instead of the EU. So all of a sudden, there's this uprising of people. Of this, like, there was this like neo-Nazi group called C418 who recently came out saying, like, yeah, like the Maidan thing would have been like an LGBTQ parade if it wasn't for us, because we were actually willing to shoot people. And it was because of US weapons and NATO and Victoria Nuland that we were actually able to get the money and weapons to, carry out this coup. All right, so they kicked out Yanukovych, and then Victoria Nuland is then caught on the phone talking about, like, ooh, should we put in next? I wonder. It's like, why is the U.S. ambassador talking about who should be the next leader of Ukraine rather than the people of Ukraine? I mean, so there's a myth that Ukraine has some democracy, but no, it's just like the most backward engineered US dominated country that exists. And those people are rebelling too. I mean, those people can only take so much before they actually decide to, go on. But the whole, and so Russia since like 2016, because the western part of Ukraine was shelling the border of Russia and Ukraine in the east, the Donetsk and the Oblast region. And Russia was crying to the UN, saying, like, hey, listen, this is going on. The neo Nazis that the US and NATO funded are uh, killing our people here in Donetsk and Lugansk, and we need your help. And then there was the Minsk II agreement, and then later, then what's her name, the former president of Germany, the Chancellor Angela Merkel, says, yeah, that was just a way to buy time so that Ukraine could arm up and be ready for this war. And then, like a couple weeks before the actual invasion, where Russia, recognized Donetsk and Lugansk as autonomous regions part of Russia, um, the shelling was intensified, and the U.S. knew something, that they knew that this was coming, and um, what that meant then was, but like Russia was trying for 6 years to say something about this, and nobody listened. And at some point, you poke the bear enough, it's gonna bite back. Not to justify what Russia and Putin did, I'm just telling the truth what happened. Right. I think the war, and like now we know the war could have been over in April of that year. It could have been over within 3 months. But Boris Johnson sabotaged the talks. I think things are just going to get a whole lot uglier if we don't actually get some kind of negotiation and peace talks. As to Gaza and Israel, I mean, that right there is like a whole can of worms. First of all, I think as somebody who's running for the US Congress, it's really not my position to say whether or not there should or should not be a country known as Israel. I stand by what the United Nations has determined, and I will stand by whatever future ruling the United Nations determines as to whether or not Israel has a right to a statehood or not. If this was 1948 and you asked me, should there be an Israel, I would have said no. But there is one now. But that being said, and just to get that out of the way, because I know that's the most pressing answer question that exists, like, do you think Israel should have statehood or not? I think the most pressing thing is I think Israel should stop the genocide in Gaza. Um, I think Israel has a long history of kicking out the Palestinians from the Nakbas, and when Israel was implemented as a state, like one of the conditions of them being allowed a country to call themselves sovereign was that they would have the right, like they would implement the right to return for all the Palestinians that fled. And they said sure, and they haven't done that, so they haven't really been upholding with their UN resolutions. Um, I think what Israel is doing is they're acting as a rogue state right now, and Netanyahu has lost his mind as well as the rest of the Knesset. But it's not really Israel acting alone. It's people have to remember this is like US, UK led. Like this is not being done just from the Knesset or from Netanyahu's war cabinet. I mean, yeah, that's part of it. This is very much America's policy. This is the US's policy. Every time John Kirby Or Blinken goes on a press tour and he says, no, Israel is autonomous. They do whatever they want. That's a lie. Everyone knows is a lie because what Israel's operations are doing and how they decide where to go next and who to target is being very much discussed at the Pentagon as much as it's being discussed in the Knesset and whatever the Pentagon equivalent of Israel is. Like, that's what that is. That's just the truth, of what's going on, what has been going on. So, um, yeah, that's where I stand on Ukraine and Israel.
Yeah, and one more I actually wanted to address. I should have probably mentioned in the initial question is the whole Taiwan question. I mean, it's something that you called Nancy Pelosi out on to her face. Just your thoughts on that. I mean, a lot of people think that's an unavoidable conflict. That now they're talking that U.S. Special Forces are going to be stationed there permanently. It's looking like this is something that we can't help but steer ourselves into. What's your position there?
Um, Taiwan is like kind of like the next domino to fall that they're preparing. I mean, in the way in which they had Ukraine cooking for the last 10 years, ready to drop a hat and start a war with over, and then they had Gaza also cooking there, waiting for that to start. Taiwan is next, if we don't stop it now. Like the way in which they're sticking with this strategy of having a bigger country try and invade a smaller country. Like that's what's going on here, right? So Taiwan is the next domino to fall. Will probably be the next war to happen if we don't actually change the conditions in our country, or so they think. I mean, I think personally we're going to get to a nuclear war before we even get to see Taiwan versus mainland China. But they're definitely trying to beef up Taiwan as a way to be ready to distract China with a war. That's what they want. But the Chinese are patient. I mean, so maybe they're much more patient and they're much more diplomatic in their approach.
Yeah, I agree. It's something I say consistently both on stream and on the radio show is, even if you want to make the arguments that China is an imperialist power, which is a difficult one to make considering its list of foreign interventions in the 20th century is like very minimal. But even if you want to make the argument that China is an imperialist power, it's nowhere near the level of imperialist power that the US is. I mean, the US, as you mentioned before, is a state that essentially thrives on war. We rely on it. And it's because of things like what Mitch McConnell says, like about the war in Ukraine and Russia, that, that war is about depleting our adversary, right? And it's also about subsidizing weapons manufacturers in the US. And from what I take it, from everything you've said here tonight, you believe that we'd be better off subsidizing our own communities. And I think that that's very commendable. And it's something that should be promoted. Obviously, I'd like it to be promoted in the major parties, but even in, this growing grassroots movement, be it the Greens or the Libertarians or whatever, I think it's even something RFK says a lot, despite all of his flaws. We need to do more to invest in our communities and rebuild America from the ground up. Okay, so the one last thing I have for you, it's actually a question from a listener. I only have one here, but he wants to know if you were elected to Congress, what would be your strategy to ensure that you're not absorbed into the greater political power structure?
Oh, well, it's my association with Lyndon LaRouche that would probably stop me from doing that. I mean, I've been associated with the LaRouche organization for the last 10 years or so, and they're an organization that has been kicking butt for the last 50 years. And they have had many chances to sell out, and they just haven't. And as a result, they paid the price for it. Lynn went to jail unfairly because people like Henry Kissinger and George H. Bush wanted him in jail. As for me personally, I mean, for one, I have a really good team of people who are composed of people like that. And I mean, I know my weaknesses, I know my vulnerabilities. Money is not going to do it for me. My vice has always been women. You get me a nice woman to tell me I'm like, she'll manipulate the hell out of me, and like, I have cut out any semblance of what can be deemed as a personal life now. and I am fully committed and devoted to my campaign. I have quit my job as a part-time I was a barista, and I quit that job last week because my I don't want to be manipulated or controlled in that way, thinking I can live some double life where it's like, yeah, there's Jose the congressman, and then there's Jose the person. No, Jose the person is Jose the congressman. My identity is revolved around changing this country now. That is who I am. No amount of money or women or any kind of vice can ever take that away from me. I am committed right now to this, and this is my identity. And should I ever fall from that, I would hope that the listener would remind me of what I'm saying right now, hold me accountable. And should the day ever come where I'm being confronted at my own town hall for legitimate reasons, I would like to think that'll be the voice in the back of my head that I try to incur on AOC and others, where I'll be like, oh my God, what have I become? So it's a tough question, and it requires my constituency and that listener to hold me accountable just as much as I have to hold myself accountable.
Great. I think probably a good follow up to that, and probably going to be our last question here is, you mentioned the LaRouche movement. I think that there are probably lots of people in the audience who are not at all familiar with the LaRouche movement whatsoever. I think in many ways, I don't know if you'd agree with this characterization. It's a little bit of a obscure kind of fringe movement in terms of the broader American political landscape. But could you talk like a little bit about what the LaRouche movement is, what its beliefs are, some of its core axioms? Because I think the listeners could might find that very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why people think it's fringe and obscure is because it's been intentionally put that way. And now, if you Google LaRouche or LaRoucheite, you get a whole bunch of things like, oh, he was a cult leader, he was this, he's that. I mean, I'm not ignorant of these things. I was finding these things when I was first coming around, and I was freaked out by it. It's been done that way intentionally. And I think if more people understood what actually happened to Lyndon LaRouche, they would see him as the Julian Assange of the 90s. Like, I know that's like a big claim to make, but like, honestly, like, people should just look into the matter more, um, beyond just beyond just Wikipedia. People should really look into it and make their own decisions. And if people really took the time to read like the Railroad book, which is the book that was published on his case, or other books that we published on, like, or just look up on our site like the facts about the case, people would be like, whoa, like this guy got the short end of the stick. And our problem was just that we didn't have the internet like we had it today to tell the truth. So, and it's that the slanders have stuck since the 90s. And I mean Helga Zepp-LaRouche was just interviewed by Kim Iverson like this week, and like I was like, what? Like, oh my God, we're breaking through the mold, like the truth is coming out. So yeah.
Right. So I guess well, we hit on a lot of topics. I think an hour is like a pretty good place to stop. My one last thing would be, do you want to plug any of your social media here? Like, where can people find out more about you and your campaign?
People can support my campaign at votevega.nyc. I think all my socials should be on there. If they're not, my Twitter and my Instagram, and I should probably change this, is Hosb Trigga, JOSB TRIGGA. People can find me on Twitter and Instagram. That's JOSB TRIGGA. I know it's confusing. I'm sorry. But yeah.
All right, cool, man. Well, thank you so much for the time. And, hopefully we'll talk again in the future. And hopefully when we do, you'll be on the ballot and we can talk about the upcoming election.
Oh, man, that'd be great. Yes. Thank you.
All right. Best of luck, man. And we'll talk soon.
Cool. I'll see you.